Hello, Still Outrun community. My name is Brian Reap, and I am facilitating our current book study on Outrunning the Demons by Phil Hewitt. And I am excited to be joined today with the author himself, Phil Hewitt. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. It's a privilege to be able to talk to you.
My pleasure. It's really lovely to meet you, really lovely to chat across the Atlantic. And I feel incredibly flattered and excited that you are taking an interest in the book. And it feels really beautiful to be able to share it with you. So I am very grateful. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a really awesome opportunity, and I can't wait to share this with our community because I know they'll be excited to hear directly from you.
Yeah.
Outrunning the demons, lives transformed through running. You share your own story, and it's comprised of numerous stories from people around the country that have benefited from running when facing a trauma and getting through a trauma. Uh, could you share a little bit about how this book came to be?
Yeah, well, it all started in a really, really dark place, a really horrible place in which I very, very nearly lost my life. I think I was pretty close to, no longer being here. One of my obsessions has been running for years and years and years, but I'm also completely obsessed with the sport of cricket, which you lot probably don't know a great deal about, but it's just a wonderful, absorbing sport. And I'd always wanted to see England play a game abroad, and South Africa is another big cricketing nation. And I had the chance to go and see England play cricket in Cape Town, the ground called Newlands, which is just the most beautiful cricket ground in the world. It's absolutely stunning. And I had a great day. England lost. They were hammered by South Africa, but it just didn't matter because it was just such a buzz. It was such a high. And I think I was a bit dim. I kind of left the ground on a high. I was so excited by the experience. So I didn't really think about making proper arrangements for getting back into Cape Town, apart from just walking. And the ground is in a lovely suburb, about 6 or 7 miles outside of Cape Town. I just thought I'd walk, not thinking about the area I'd go through. And I asked a few people, and they said, well, yes, it's that direction to get back into central Cape Town, but I wouldn't do it if I were you. And I kind of ignored that and just thought, I'll walk, it's a nice evening. And after 2 or 3 miles, the only way into central Cape Town was to walk along a motorway, which was terrifying, frankly. It was very busy, lots of cars. So I was sort of walking on the hard shoulder, the edge of the motorway, and then that stopped. So I scrambled up onto the bank, and that stopped in all brambles, and was just looking across thinking, what do I do? And saw on the far side of the motorway there was a little path leading into a kind of community. So I legged it across the motorway, 8-way lanes of fast-moving cars, tumbled down this little path into the community, walked through it, and emerged in this part of Cape Town that I kind of recognised. It was completely flat, completely rubble, complete desolation, just like wasteland. It was a place that had been bulldozed 50 years before. No one had ever returned to it. And it was the most dangerous part of Cape Town, District 6. And I could see on the far side, central Cape Town. I just thought, I'll walk very quickly through this and I'll be okay. And I wasn't. I was walking for 2 or 3 minutes. Someone ran up behind me and demanded my camera, shouted in very colourful language that they wanted my camera. I tried to resist as he asked for the camera. He seemed to punch me a couple of times in the leg. With the force of that, I went over, but pulled him over, and he fell behind me and was kicking me in the back of the neck, kicking me in the head, which was painful. And we were sort of wrestling. He was behind me, so I tried to put around so he was facing me, at which point he was trying to thump me in the face, kick me in the stomach, and trying to sort of knee me under the chin. And I looked down at that point and I saw that my leg was absolutely awash with blood, and realised that he hadn't punched me at all. He had stabbed me. And so I let go of the camera, and he stood up at that point, and he was just furious. He just stood up, stood over me, and kicked and kicked and kicked and kicked me in the ribs, just kicked and kicked and kicked. And I was thinking, why are you doing this? You know, my leg was covered in blood. There was no way I was going to stand up. He just kicked and kicked and then ran off. And I think that's one of the great images that will always stay with me, just looking and seeing this guy running away from me across the wasteland, no one around, no one anywhere around. And I was just thinking, are you going to turn around? Are you going to look around? And no, he didn't. He just ran off and left me there. And I was on the sort of gravelly, grassy bit, scrubby bit next to the pavement, and tried to stand, couldn't. So I pulled myself back onto the pavement and just lay there, and I was conscious of blood starting to spread on the pavement, which was, yeah, quite terrifying, really. It was odd, you know, the thoughts that come to mind in extremis. I was lying there thinking, oh, well, at least I'm wearing my favourite Rolling Stones t-shirt, which was a gift from my daughter. That was kind of a consolation in that moment. And I was conscious that my eyesight was sort of kind of pixelating, going wobbly around the edges, and just kind of channeling, just focusing. And I think I was kind of drifting off. And I just felt an incredible tiredness. I don't know if it was shock or blood loss. But I was just wanting to, you know, just lie back, shut my eyes, and have done with it. There was a lot of blood on the pavement, and I think if I'd done that, yeah, I probably would have simply drifted off. But it's funny, isn't it? Survival instinct is strong. And something in my mind just kept saying, you know, prop yourself up. So I did. I sort of propped myself up on an elbow and tried to look around and tried to give the impression that I was still alive, still this side. And yeah, fortunately, a guy pulled up. I was conscious that it was all slightly blurry by now, but a guy in a pizza delivery van, as it turned out. I didn't see that at the time, but just a white car, well, a car, not a van, car pulled up. And this guy was walking towards me very purposefully, and pulled me to my feet and hopped me into the back of his car. And it's just astonishingly brave when you think this was a dangerous place. It could have been some sort of trap. Well, I suppose it's obvious that it was genuine, but you know, he opted to stop in this horrible place to save my life. And he pulled me into the back of the car, and did something that would never have occurred to me. He was just brilliant. He propped my leg up on the back seat on a pile of pizza boxes rather, which I trashed, really. There's an awful lot of blood on those boxes, and I think quite a few people in Cape Town that night didn't get their pizzas. But he just elevated my leg to sort of hold the bleeding for a while, and drove me to hospital. And he was just so in command, took charge of everything. He was brilliant. He started hitting loads of red lights, and I think he was conscious that we needed to get there quickly. So he pulled up the car, yanked this pizza sign off the car, shoved it in the back with me, said, hold this. And then he drove through all the red lights just to get to hospital in time. And I think I was drifting a bit. Maybe, yeah, I just wasn't fully aware of things. I was conscious that he was coming back to the car with a wheelchair. He pushed me into the accident emergency department, where I had no idea what the injuries were. So my whole of my left-hand side was just red from ribs down to my shoe, an awful lot of blood. I remember thinking, you know, what are the injuries? And I was all cleaned up, and they started stitching up. Lovely doctor who was chatting to me about wanting to move to England, of all things, which just felt very surreal that she'd be telling me this in those circumstances. But I think he was just trying to distract, sort of take my mind off the circumstances. But he also sewed up my leg a bit too quickly. I had a 6-inch gash to my lower leg and a very deep puncture wound to my thigh. And he sewed that one up too quickly, and it was still bleeding. And I could see my leg swelling with internal bleeding, so I took the stitches out and sewed it up deep inside, which was surreal. I mean, it's a horrible thought. I could actually feel the fingers inside my leg, which was bizarre. And then he sewed it up again, and then leant against my leg with all his weight to stop the bleeding. And I could just see my leg go black from my hip down to my toes. It was about 15 stitches, 18 stitches if you include a couple in my hand. It was a kind of defensive wound. I think I must have raised my hand. Strangely, it was just here. If I'd turned my hand like that and it was just there, I'd have gone, I guess. Wow. So 18 stitches in all, 3 broken ribs, and quite bad bruising to stomach and liver and so on. Just battered all over, just completely black and blue. Yeah. It's funny, I guess the trauma was hitting then, and I have no recollection of getting back to the holiday apartment where I was staying. I know they tried to sell me a pair of crutches, and I think that's when I threw a wobbler and said, "I'm not buying your crutches." And I think I just kind of blacked out, and next thing I knew, someone must have taken me back to the holiday apartment, which had a fantastic view of Table Mountain if I could have stood up, but they just dumped me on the floor of the apartment. And by then it was getting dark, and oddly, they didn't even think to switch the light on. So I just sat there for the whole night, waiting till the next morning. I could crawl across the floor and get some help and get scooped up by the police, get scooped up by a friend of mine, a guy I used to work with who was living in Cape Town, I was supposed to be meeting up with, and he was brilliant. He just took charge. And so I sort of literally staggered through the rest of the week, feeling very shaken, feeling really quite upset by it. But my mate's daughter was getting engaged that week, so I was trying to not be the party pooper. I was trying to be very cheerful and, the well-behaved Brit abroad, and then got back home. And the fight back was terrible. I have never been more uncomfortable in my life. And I think when I got back home, the mental aspect of it just hit me, the absolute trauma of what had happened. And it's odd, I work as a journalist, so I spend my day asking questions, just questions, and I usually get answers. But with this, I was just absolutely besieged by all these questions, things going round and round and round my head, and no possible answers. I wanted to know to what extent I was to blame for what happened. I was pretty reckless. I made no proper plans. I walked through the most dangerous part in Cape Town. How on earth did I do that? How stupid was that? I wanted to know at what point what happened became inevitable. Could I have done something different even at the last minute that would have prevented what happened happen? I want to know where this guy was from, where he went to, how long he'd been following me, who else he's done it to, whether he'd used that knife on other people that day. I actually wrote them down. It's about 500 stupid, pointless, irrelevant questions that I wanted answers to and couldn't get answers to. And it was just going round and round and round my head and just driving me mad, just the sheer impact of what had happened. And I think underpinned by the fact that I was realizing, the biggest question of all was how close was I to death at that point? Another couple of minutes, I was losing a lot of blood. He did have to raise my leg in the car. The doctor stitched up when it was still bleeding. I did feel that I was fading. How much longer did I have to live at that moment? And all those questions built up. And 2 weeks after the attack back home, Sunday afternoon, my wife said to me, "Come on, let's get out. So we went to a shopping centre, a really quiet shopping centre, and went into this shop, Boots the Chemist, which is the most boring shop. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's a very, very safe, very, very safe shop. And I just stood in the middle of that and had the most monumental panic attack on a really quiet Sunday afternoon. I just stood there, struggling to breathe, thinking, if anyone touches me or speaks to me or says anything, I don't know if I will scream or faint or be sick or run out of the shop screaming. I just collapsed in a heap, and I just stood there riding it, just trying to get through that moment. I did, and I think the funny thing is that probably no one was aware of that. No one apart from me. This awful, I don't know how long it was that I went through, and sort of regained my composure and said to my wife, Fiona, what had happened? And she said, well, you must go back to the doctors tomorrow. And being a man, I thought I knew what was wrong, as we do, don't we? And I went back to the nurse the next morning, and lovely bloke, really, really good runner. And I said to him, look, Joe, I had this awful panic attack. It's really obvious to me that my wounds are infected. And he looked at them and said, no, actually, they are healing really nicely. do you think you need to talk to someone about this? And yeah, I have done that since, with a degree of success. But back then, 2 weeks after, I decided I was going to sort myself out. And that evening, I was thinking I'm going to have a 2-point plan to get back to health. The first thing I was going to do was to write down every last memory, everything about what happened, what I felt about it, all those questions. Yeah, the humiliations. There were aspects of, so many aspects to it that were just horrible that I haven't mentioned, that I just wanted them all written down, all recorded, all there to look at on a page, to write that story. And then the very next day, 2 weeks, 1 day after being stabbed twice, wounds barely healed, ribs agony, 3 broken ribs, and just still battered all over, I went for a run. I've always been a runner, always loved running. And it was just amazing. It was a beautiful spring morning. It was early March by then, 2016. The attack happened, would you believe, on St. Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2016. A couple of weeks later, I went for this run, and blimey, it hurt. It really hurt. I had 2 wounds in my leg, which obviously weren't remotely healed, broken ribs and bruised and really tender stomach from the kicking. But just to be out there in my running kit, just to be running on this lovely spring morning, it was absolutely transformative. I just felt I was getting something back, that I was becoming me again. That all of a sudden, with that run, even though it hurt, I was no longer Phil who's been stabbed and could so easily have died. I was Phil who at that point had run 30 marathons. And it was just like a return. It was almost like something was lifting from my mind. So I'm not remotely over it, I'm still there. But that was the first crucial step towards something approaching healing. And so I continued to write down all my thoughts about it, and I continued to run. And it became clear that what I was actually writing was a diary of my healing. And very presumptuously, I sent it to a guy I'd heard about, the commissioning editor, a lovely guy called Matt Lowing at Bloomsbury Publishers. And I was really lucky. He was looking through submitted scripts. I sent the first few chapters in, and he happened to have read one of my earlier running books, Keep On Running. So he knew the name, took a look at what I'd written, and liked it, and got back in touch. And said, crucially, this was the really interesting thing, he didn't think there was any mileage in, or any commercial potential in a book about, it's fine that he said this one unknown stabbed runner. Wow. He said, why don't you turn it into a much wider survey of people who have run in the wake of trauma? And that's what this book has become, a book about people who've had hideous things happen to them, loved ones murdered, horrible illness, horrible accidents, war, terrorism, awful things happening. But people who have found incredible strength and hope and peace of mind, tranquility, equanimity, all these things, stillness, or a new identity, who have found these things through running. And that's the theme about the book, throughout the book. It's interviews with 34 people who, I think of it as people who have been to hell and discovered the safest, surest, best way back is to run. And the book is these 34 interviews, bookended with me standing at the start of my first marathon after the stabbing. And then the final chapter is me at the finishing line of my first marathon after the stabbing, my 31st marathon. And I'm now at 40 marathons, which I know isn't a big number, but to have done 10 marathons since the stabbing, wow, feels fantastic to me and makes me realize mentally I owe so much to running.
Wow, that's such a powerful story. And, to us, it's a story, to you, it's life. And I think that is what helps people connect with your book, is that, your story, it's real. The 34 shared stories are real people experiencing real life. And like you said, finding that solace through running. to help get them through. It's just amazing, and I think for me it's a very unique book to read, and I'm glad that I found it because I think that we can all find something from each of these people um, to help us continue to push forward through
Thank you. And
what we
I'd
may.
love to think that you would agree that it's a book about hope. It's a book
Right,
about getting to a good place. It's not a book about bad places.
right,
It's about a book of, yeah, it's a book about healing. It's a book about finding peace.
absolutely. How did you? I was curious. How did you come about finding the people that you interviewed? How did you? I mean, because you got people from all over. So how did that process take place? And
Yeah.
how did those people come forward?
Well, I'm afraid I did it in a very crass way, really. I knew I wanted about 50% American, about 40% American, about 40% UK, and some Australian runners. But so I did it in a very crass way of Googling. And I was literally Googling things like marathon and murder, runner and terrorism, and just found newspaper cuttings, newspaper articles about people who had had interesting stories to tell. And then I approached them. And the really lovely thing was they were all so open and generous and warm. And I think it's because I was able to approach them as a UK runner who had been through this horrible transformative experience, was trying to find his way back, was trying to explore how we navigate trauma. And they all responded to that. They all responded to that with such friendliness and say openness and chattiness. And the lovely thing is, I think of the 34 of us as like we're all running the same marathon, and we're all on various points along this 26.2 miles of utterly imaginary course. And sometimes I'll struggle, have a slightly difficult day, and I'll fall back a bit. Sometimes someone else, one of the other runners, will have a really good day and they'll surge on ahead. But it seems to me that the 34 of us, 35 if you include me,
Right.
are all running the same race to some fantastic imaginary finishing line that's got "You Are Healed" written across the top. And I don't suppose that'll ever happen because, yeah, I know now, 4 years on, that I will always carry this with me. And I think one of the big mistakes I made in the first year after the trauma, I kept saying to myself, come on, get over it, get over it. You're all right, get over it. You survived. What are you making a fuss about? No one died, get over it. And that is just so much the wrong approach to take. I think when something like this happens, you don't get over it. And if you did get over it, you'd miss the point of it. You would have gained nothing from it. You don't get over it. You learn to live with it. You learn to go with it. And that's a lesson that one of the runners taught me. A lovely girl called Caroline Elliott, who's an Australian runner in the book. She was on an early morning run when she was confronted by two big late teenage boys who told her that they were going to rape her, and they told her that they had a gun, and they concealed something up a jumper to give the impression that they had a gun. So for the half hour of her ordeal, the sexual assault she suffered, she was convinced they did have a gun. They didn't, but she thought they did. And she just negotiated and said to them what she was prepared to do. And they forced her to do horrible things, and she was very traumatized by it. And the trauma really hit her. The boys were very quickly apprehended, arrested, charged, and it turned out that they were going to plead not guilty, and it was going to come to a trial. But on the day of the trial, they changed their plea from not guilty to guilty, so she didn't have to appear. She didn't have to give some sort of testimony to prove what happened, to prove the impact on her. And oddly, that's when it really hit her. The poor thing, she is just so lovely and so open and so fantastic in a way, and so strong. She talks about this, but she tried to kill herself as a result in a really nasty way, which has left her scarred. But oddly, that terrible dark moment proved the turning point in her life. She moved away from where she was. She was a teacher but couldn't get back into teaching. Has since met her partner, and she's since become one of Australia's first same-sex marriages. So she's inherited a lovely family too, a boy and a girl. She's done a degree in counselling. She's moved on in every respect, different part of Australia. So that awful moment is the turning point to all the happiness that she's now got. And her great lesson, and the thing that sticks with me, she says to me, "You've got to learn to love your scars." And I think that's the best approach to trauma.
Wow.
Learn to love your scars and see what's come with them. And I think in so many ways, what happened to me, as awful as it was, has been enriching through the people I've met, the people I've spoken to, the experience of writing the book, all the lovely things it's led to, speaking to you now. You know, if I hadn't been stabbed, we wouldn't be speaking now. And
Right.
it's lovely to be speaking to you now. And it's all those good things that have happened. And I think I have a greater awareness now of what matters. So, yeah, it's that love your scar. I've got the upper scar on my leg just stings all the time. It really is stingy, and it particularly stings towards the end of a marathon. And I love that in a strange way. When I'm really knackered, really tired at the end of a marathon, it's like the scar is saying, "You're still alive. You're
Yeah.
still here, mate. Keep going. Love me. Love that scar." And I just think that's so powerful. And I think through speaking to these people, I've just gained a greater awareness, I think, of how running absolutely unpicks trauma. I think one of the first things about trauma is about PTSD, which I have, is that it's so difficult to get out of that moment. And for me, I will always be, a big part of my brain is always on that pavement, aware of the blood around, trying not to look at it, conscious that it was blurring, thinking that if something doesn't happen, I'm probably going to die here, but I can't make anything happen. It's that complete powerlessness. Yeah, that's where my mind automatically goes. But if I go for a run, the lovely thing about running is it just pulls me into the here of now. You hear your feet, you smell the trees, you smell the atmosphere, you smell everything. You're just conscious, you hear the traffic, you hear sounds. You're just instantly, when you run, pulled back into the here and now. And I think that's the other thing about trauma that is undone by running. Trauma is profoundly isolating. In the initial stages, you're playing the sort of tragic heroine, you're thinking, or tragic hero, I should say. You're thinking that, you know, no one knows what this is like. No one's experienced this. You feel like you're in a glass jar looking out at the world, and no one can understand you. But I think the lovely thing about running is it just connects you, doesn't it? You're connected to your surroundings, you're connected to the wider running community. You just, through running, become part of something. And I think the other thing that running undoes, the other key aspect of trauma that running undoes, is the powerlessness that I touched on. The fact that this guy kept kicking me, and there's nothing I could do. You know, he was just so furious that I dared to resist. He just stood, kept kicking. There's nothing I could do. I just had to bear it. And I think that powerlessness is just one of the key things of trauma, one of the things that makes it so difficult, because it's just a total loss of control. But I think what I love about running is you open your running drawer, you look at all your different coloured running tops and think, right, today I'm going to wear my red one, or my blue one, or my green one, or my yellow one, whatever. Right. And you put it on, you go out the door, and you think, am I going to turn left? Am I going to turn right? Everything is down to you. You think how far you're going to go when you come back. You think when you're going to turn left, when you're going to turn right. You think how big the loop is. You think, oh, shall I accelerate now, go a bit faster between these lampposts? And you decide when you go back. And I think running just restores that control. And yeah, I think running, for me, has been a major, major answer to trauma.
I think that's just so encouraging to people who are going to hear this and who are going to read your book. You know, just, you know, that statement of love your scar, and just talking out those specifics on how running helps you regain control. And if for people who are victims of trauma of any kind, I think it will help them bridge from feeling like a victim to being a survivor. And I think that is, um, you know, it's so key to just being able to recognize those things, like you said, even if it is, you know, as small as I get to go left or I get to go right. Like, you're back in control.
It's important.
Yeah, it's so huge.
Yeah.
And I think that's just so encouraging for people to be reminded of, you know, for whatever stage they're at and what they're going through.
Yeah. I think the other thing is one of the first victims of trauma, of course, is sleep. But if you've been for a nice long run, if you are physically tired, sleep becomes a little bit easier, and that's
Right.
crucial to healing, isn't it?
Absolutely. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but in this process of talking to all these people, what did you get out of this the most? Like what was able to help you heal even more from your own experience, from talking with all of these people?
Oh goodness, there's so many things. I think it was a sense of community. I think it was an ending of the sense of isolation that, no one feels like this. People do, and people move on. And I think it was also so encouraging that, as I say, we're all at different points on this great run through whatever it is we've been through. That, I'm now much further ahead than a lot of people who've been recently attacked or whatever. But I'm still a long way behind those people I'm speaking to. And it's the fact that they're ahead, and that you can follow. Um, Before the pandemic, we had such a crisis in this country of knife crime. It was just spreading, and it just seemed to me, always waking up in the morning, first thing you heard on the news was someone else had been stabbed. I used to find, if it was still happening, I'd find it absolutely heartbreaking, because you think of these people who are just at the start. If they're lucky enough to survive, they're just at the start of this really difficult journey. And I'm so glad I'm no longer just at the start. And I think because through the book, through the running, through the people I've interviewed, through the people who've interviewed me, I'm so much more conscious of community. And there's so much to be said for, sharing what's happened to you. I think when I feel a bit overwhelmed by what happened, my natural instinct is just to shut up and go silent and to avoid people. And that's just so wrong, isn't it? You're always so much better talking about it, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's community, isn't it? It's being together, it's sharing the experiences. And oddly, I think that's why I didn't respond particularly well to trauma counselling, rather. It seemed to me that I was with someone who had studied it, but didn't necessarily understand it. And obviously, you can't expect all counsellors to have been stabbed as part of their training. But
Right.
my feeling is, I think for the first time ever, I kind of got an understanding of what a support group does. I think you get so much from speaking to people who've been through something similar, even if they're not saying necessarily they have the answers, but it's just so comforting and consoling if you know that they've shared something that you shared, and it's a bond, and you're still around.
Absolutely. My last question would be, we have a number of people participating in our book study, and hopefully, as we continue, we'll have more and more join up. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the Still I Run community who is either currently participating or thinking about jumping in and really learning more from your book?
Well, I love those words, still I run community. There's so many important concepts in there, aren't there? Still, to still be running. The fact that you're running, the fact that you're doing something, and the fact that it's a community, it sounds like a fantastic thing. And I think if anyone's thinking about joining, do so, because we're all so much stronger when we're together, aren't we? That's one of the things that's been so horrible about lockdown and isolation, the fact we've all been thrown back to our houses, when I think naturally we are at our best as people when we are together, and community is just crucial. I think that's what this has shown me. Um, you outrun your demons together, don't you? And it sounds like Still I Run Community is a wonderful organisation with so much to give, so much to share, so much to talk about.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and share your experiences and how you've healed and how the people you've interviewed have healed. And I look forward for our community to be able to see this. And if you're open to it when we're finished in August, I would like to invite you to have a Q&A Zoom call with potentially some other participants. Um, you know, to kind of talk about what they've read and maybe ask you some questions themselves.
I would absolutely love to do that. It would be a real pleasure, a real privilege. And yeah, I'd say I'm really flattered that you're interested in the book. And if anyone wants to contact me about it, to talk about things one-to-one or whatever, you know, I will always respond. I'll always be pleased to hear. And yeah, I think, you know, sharing these things is the way that we move forward. So thank you very much. Really, really lovely to speak to you.
You as well. It's been a privilege. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.